The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall. Michael Harper sat in his worn-out armchair, staring blankly at the framed photograph resting on the coffee table in front of him. It was a picture of Ethan, his son, smiling brightly with that carefree look he always had as a teenager. 5 years had passed since Ethan's death, or at least what everyone believed to be his death. But no matter how many times Michael tried to convince himself that Ethan was gone forever, something deep inside refused to let go. Every detail about that night haunted him. The phone call, the rushed drive to the hospital, the solemn faces of the doctors. It all felt like a blur now. They told him Ethan had been in a car accident. A drunk driver had crossed into his lane and the impact had been catastrophic. There was no chance of survival, they said. No point in holding on to hope. And then came the hardest part. The burial. Michael remembered standing by the grave, clutching the folded American flag handed to him during the small ceremony. He hadn't seen Ethan's body before it was sealed away in the coffin. The funeral director had explained gently that the injuries were too severe for an open casket. At the time, Michael didn't question it. His heart was shattered, his mind clouded with grief. All he wanted was to believe that Ethan was finally at peace. But over the years, cracks began to form in the foundation of that belief. Little things gnawed at him, like the vague way the police report described the crash scene, or the fact that none of Ethan's personal belongings were returned after the accident. Not his wallet, not his watch, not even the silver bracelet Michael had given him on his 18th birthday. When Michael asked about these items, people shrugged it off, saying they must have been lost or destroyed in the wreckage. Yet, every unanswered question added another layer of doubt. Then there were the dreams, or rather, nightmares. In them, Michael would find himself standing beside Ethan's coffin, staring down at it. But instead of seeing his son's face, he saw emptiness. Just a void where Ethan should have been. Every time he woke up, drenched in sweat, the same thought plagued him. What if Ethan isn't really dead? One stormy evening, as rain battered against the windows of his modest home, Michael found himself pacing back and forth in the living room. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within him. For 5 long years he had tried to move on, to accept the loss of his only child. But tonight, acceptance felt impossible. Tonight, the questions overwhelmed him. If Ethan truly wasn't in that coffin, then where was he? Was he alive somewhere, suffering alone? Or worse, was someone keeping him hidden? Michael stopped mid-step, his eyes landing on the photo of Ethan again. "I need to know," he whispered aloud, more to himself than anyone else. "I can't keep living like this." The idea hit him suddenly, shocking him with its audacity. He needed to open the coffin, not just think about it, not just wonder, but actually do it. Exhume Ethan's remains and see for himself whether his son was truly there. It sounded insane, even to him. Who digs up their own child's coffin after 5 years? What kind of father does that make him? But the alternative, spending the rest of his life wondering, doubting, questioning, felt far worse. The next morning, Michael visited the local cemetery office. He knew it wouldn't be easy to get permission to exhume a grave. Laws were strict and exhumations required court approval unless special circumstances could be proven. Still, Michael prepared himself. He rehearsed his story, explaining that he needed closure, that without seeing Ethan one last time, he couldn't fully grieve. To his surprise, the officials listened intently. Perhaps it was the raw emotion in his voice, or maybe they sensed the desperation behind his request. Whatever the reason, they agreed to help him file the necessary paperwork. Weeks passed as Michael waited anxiously for the legal process to unfold. Each day felt like an eternity. He barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities. What if he opened the coffin and found exactly what he feared? What if Ethan wasn't there at all? And if he wasn't, what did that mean? Had someone taken him? Was he still out there somewhere, alive but unreachable? These thoughts consumed him, making everyday tasks feel meaningless. Finally, the day arrived. Early in the morning, under gray skies heavy with clouds, Michael stood at the edge of the cemetery, watching as workers prepared to dig up the grave. His hands trembled as he clasped them together, trying to steady himself. A small crowd had gathered, curious onlookers who whispered among themselves, speculating about why a man would disturb his son's final resting place after so many years. Michael ignored them. Their opinions didn't matter. Only the truth mattered. As the workers carefully unearthed the coffin, memories flooded back to Michael. He remembered teaching Ethan how to ride a bike, cheering from the sidelines at his soccer games and hugging him tightly when he graduated high school. Those moments seemed so distant now, almost like fragments of a dream slipping through his fingers. Yet here he was, standing mere feet away from the box that supposedly contained his son's body. When the coffin was finally exposed, the workers paused, waiting for instructions. Michael took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. With trembling hands, he motioned for them to pry open the lid. As the nails groaned and the wood creaked, Michael felt his heartbeat quicken. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading and longing for all at once. And then, the lid was lifted. For a brief second, Michael froze, unable to comprehend what he saw. Instead of Ethan's body, the coffin was filled with crumpled newspapers, bricks and dirt, no sign of his son anywhere. Shock turned to disbelief, then anger, and finally determination. Someone had lied to him. Someone had faked Ethan's death. And now, Michael was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Michael stood there staring into the empty coffin, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. Newspapers, bricks, dirt. None of it belonged to Ethan. None of it explained where his son had gone, or why someone would go through such lengths to deceive him. The weight of betrayal pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket. For 5 years he had mourned, cried, and tried to move forward, believing Ethan was dead. Now, standing face to face with this grotesque lie, Michael realized that everything he thought he knew about his son's fate was false. The workers who had helped exhume the coffin exchanged uneasy glances. They seemed unsure of what to say or do next. One of them muttered something under his breath about calling the authorities, but Michael barely heard him. His thoughts were racing too fast, tumbling over each other in a chaotic whirlwind. Who could have done this? Why? And most importantly, where was Ethan? As the workers began packing up their tools and securing the site, Michael pulled out his phone. His hands shook as he scrolled through his contacts, searching for someone, anyone, who might be able to shed light on this mystery. He started with Detective Harris, the officer who had handled Ethan's case back when the accident occurred. Harris had always been polite, professional, even sympathetic during those early days of grief. But now Michael couldn't help but wonder if the detective had known more than he let on. When Harris answered the call, his voice sounded calm but guarded. "Mr. Harper," he said slowly, "this is unexpected. Is everything okay?" "No," Michael replied bluntly. "Everything is not okay. I just opened Ethan's coffin and guess what? My son isn't in it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Harris finally spoke again, his tone had shifted. "What are you talking about, Mr. Harper? That's impossible." "Impossible," Michael snapped, his voice rising despite his attempt to stay composed. "I'm looking at an empty coffin right now. Someone lied to me, detective. Someone staged my son's death and I need answers." Harris hesitated before responding. "Listen, Mr. Harper, I understand you're upset, but exhuming a grave without proper cause is highly irregular. Are you sure about what you're saying?" "I'm standing here looking at it," Michael barked. "Don't tell me I don't know what I saw. Now, unless you want me storming into your precinct demanding answers, you better start telling me the truth." Another pause followed, longer this time. Finally, Harris sighed. "All right, meet me at the station in an hour. We'll talk." An hour later, Michael sat across from Harris in a small interrogation room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the walls. Harris leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Let's start from the beginning, Mr. Harper. What exactly led you to exhume your son's coffin?" Michael clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain calm. It doesn't matter why I did it. What matters is what I found, or rather didn't find. So stop wasting time and tell me what you know. Harris rubbed his temples, looking genuinely conflicted. Look, I wasn't involved in the investigation directly. Most of the details came from the paramedics and forensics team. According to their reports, Ethan died instantly upon impact. His body was transported to the morgue and, well, you know the rest. But you didn't see the body yourself, Michael pressed. Did anyone confirm it was actually Ethan in that coffin? Harris hesitated, then shook his head. No. Not personally, but we trusted the process. These things don't usually get messed up. Usually, Michael echoed bitterly. So you're telling me it's possible someone tampered with the evidence? Someone made it look like Ethan died when he didn't? Before Harris could respond, another officer entered the room, holding a folder. He handed it to Harris, who flipped it open and scanned its contents quickly, his brow furrowed as he read. This complicates things, he muttered. What does? Michael demanded. Harris glanced at him, then back at the folder. According to these records, Ethan's body was released to a private funeral home shortly after the accident, a place called Willow Creek Mortuary. Do you remember dealing with them? Michael frowned, trying to recall. I think so. They handled the arrangements. But I never saw the body. They said it wasn't possible because of the injuries. Well, according to this, Harris continued, pointing to a section of the document, Willow Creek received a direct order from someone higher up to handle the burial discreetly. There's no mention of a body being transferred to them. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Higher up? You mean someone outside the police department? It appears that way, Harris admitted reluctantly. And if that's true, then whoever faked Ethan's death went to great lengths to cover their tracks. Determined to uncover the truth, Michael decided to visit Willow Creek Mortuary the very next day. The building was old and decrepit, with peeling paint and a sign hanging crookedly above the entrance. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and decay. An elderly man sat behind the front desk, shuffling papers absent-mindedly. When Michael approached, the man looked up, startled. Can I help you? The man asked, his voice raspy. Yes, Michael said firmly. I'm here about my son, Ethan Harper. You handled his funeral 5 years ago. The man's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he seemed flustered. Ethan Harper? Yes, I remember the name. Tragic story. Such a shame. Tell me about it, Michael said, leaning closer. Because when I opened his coffin yesterday, it was empty. Care to explain how that happened? The man swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable. Empty? That's unusual. Very unusual. Let me check. Our records. He disappeared into a back room, leaving Michael alone in the dimly lit lobby. Minutes passed and Michael's patience wore thin. Just as he was about to follow the man, the mortician returned, clutching a dusty file folder. He placed it on the counter and opened it cautiously. This is strange, the man murmured, flipping through the pages. There's no record of us receiving a body for Ethan Harper. Instead, we were instructed to prepare a sealed casket and arrange the burial immediately. We assumed the body had already been handled elsewhere. By whom? Michael asked, sharply. The mortician shook his head. I don't know. All I have is a note here saying the instructions came from a third party. No names, no signatures, just orders. Michael's jaw tightened. Whoever had orchestrated this had planned it meticulously, ensuring no loose ends were left behind. But why? What purpose did faking Ethan's death serve? On his way out of the mortuary, Michael noticed a stack of old newspapers sitting on a nearby table. Picking one up, he flipped through it idly, stopping suddenly when he spotted a familiar name, Victor Kane. The article described Kane as a local businessman with ties to several high-profile cases involving corruption and organized crime. Something about the name rang a bell, though Michael couldn't quite place it. Still, he tucked the newspaper under his arm, sensing it might hold a clue. Over the next few days, Michael scoured every resource he could find, piecing together fragments of information. He learned that Ethan had been in trouble before his supposed death: gambling debts, dangerous friends, and threats from unknown sources. It became clear that Ethan hadn't just been an innocent victim. He had been caught in something much bigger than himself. But the question remained, was Ethan still alive, or had someone silenced him permanently? As Michael dug deeper, he realized that finding the truth wouldn't be easy. Powerful people were involved, people who didn't want their secrets exposed. Yet Michael refused to give up. For the first time in 5 years, he had hope, not certainty, but hope. And that was enough to keep him going. Michael's search for answers took him deeper into a labyrinth of secrets and lies, each revelation pulling him further away from the simple life he once knew. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Ethan's disappearance wasn't just some random act. It was part of something calculated, deliberate, and dangerous. Every clue led to another question. Every lead seemed to vanish like smoke in the wind. But Michael refused to let exhaustion or fear stop him. He had come too far to turn back now. The newspaper article about Victor Kane gnawed at him. It felt significant, though Michael couldn't pinpoint why. Kane's name kept surfacing in connection with shady dealings, money laundering, bribery, even whispers of ties to organized crime. Yet there was no direct link between Kane and Ethan. Still, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that Kane held a piece of the puzzle. If Ethan had been involved with people like Kane, it would explain why someone went to such lengths to fake his death. People like Kane didn't leave loose ends, and Ethan might have been one. Determined to confront Kane, Michael began tracking him down. It wasn't easy. Kane lived in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. Getting close to him wouldn't be simple, but Michael wasn't deterred. Instead, he decided to start small, gathering whatever information he could from those who worked around Kane: the waitstaff at restaurants he frequented, the doormen at buildings he visited, anyone who might slip up and reveal something useful. One evening, while sitting in a dimly lit bar where Kane was rumored to meet associates, Michael struck up a conversation with a bartender. The man was older, with graying hair and tired eyes, but he had a knack for remembering faces and names. When Michael casually mentioned Kane's name, the bartender's demeanor shifted slightly. "Victor Kane, huh?" the man said, polishing a glass with deliberate slowness. "What do you want with him?" "I'm just curious," Michael replied, keeping his tone light. "Heard he's quite the character." The bartender chuckled dryly. "That's one way to put it. Guy doesn't mess around. You cross him, you disappear. That's what they say anyway." Michael leaned forward, trying not to appear too eager. "Disappear, like permanently?" The bartender shrugged. "Or maybe not, depends on how valuable you are to him. Some people vanish for good, others, well, let's just say they aren't seen again in public." Michael's pulse quickened. Could Ethan be one of those people? Was he alive but hidden, forced into silence because of something he'd witnessed or done? The thought both terrified and energized Michael. If Ethan was still out there, then there was still hope. The next day, Michael paid a visit to Ethan's closest friends from before his supposed death. Over the years, many of them had drifted out of touch, but Michael managed to track down a few. One of them, a young man named Ryan, agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Ryan looked nervous as he slid into the booth across from Michael, glancing around as if expecting someone to jump out and accuse him of something. "Thanks for meeting me," Michael said, offering a reassuring smile. "I know it's been a long time since you've heard from Ethan or me, but I need your help." Ryan hesitated, fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. "I don't know what I can tell you, Mr. Harper. After everything that happened, we all thought Ethan was gone." "But you saw him right before he disappeared, didn't you?" Michael pressed gently. "You were one of his best friends. Did he mention anything unusual? Any problems he was having?" Ryan sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Yeah, actually. Ethan was in trouble. Big trouble. He owed money to some bad people, gambling debts mostly. He tried to pay them off, but it wasn't enough. They started threatening him, following him, showing up at his apartment late at night. Michael's stomach churned. Did he ever talk about Victor Kane? Ryan's eyes widened. How do you know about Kane? He came up during my investigation, Michael said carefully. Why? What does Kane have to do with Ethan? Ryan glanced over his shoulder again, lowering his voice. Kane runs this whole operation, a network of illegal gambling dens, loan sharks, that kind of thing. Ethan got caught up in it. At first, it was just fun, hanging out, making easy cash, but then he lost big, really big, and when he couldn't pay, they gave him an ultimatum. Work for them or face the consequences. What kind of work? Michael asked, dread pooling in his chest. I don't know exactly, Ryan admitted. But Ethan mentioned something about delivering packages, passing messages. He said it was dangerous, but he didn't have a choice. He was scared, Mr. Harper. Scared of what they'd do to him if he backed out. Michael nodded slowly, piecing together the fragments of Ethan's final days. If Ethan had been working for Kane, it made sense that someone would want to silence him, to protect secrets or eliminate risks. But faking his death? That suggested Ethan wasn't just a pawn. He might have known something important, something worth hiding. Armed with this new information, Michael decided to take a bold step. He reached out to a private investigator he'd heard about through a friend, a woman named Claire Bennett, known for taking on cases others deemed impossible. Claire was skeptical at first, warning Michael that digging into Kane's affairs could put him in serious danger. But when Michael explained everything he'd discovered so far, she reluctantly agreed to help. Claire brought skills and resources Michael didn't have access to restricted databases, connections, within law enforcement, and a sharp eye for detail. Together, they combed through financial records, phone logs, and surveillance footage, searching for any trace of Ethan. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. There were unexplained transactions linked to Kane's businesses, sudden movements of funds that coincided with Ethan's disappearance. Then there were the anonymous tips sent to local authorities around the same time, tips claiming Ethan had fled town to escape debt collectors. It's a cover-up, Claire said one evening, spreading papers across her desk. They wanted everyone to think Ethan ran away or died. Either way, it gets him out of the picture without raising suspicion. But why go to such lengths? Michael asked, rubbing his temples. If they wanted him gone, why not just kill him outright? Because he's worth more alive than dead, Claire replied grimly. If Ethan knows something damaging, something that could bring Kane down, they'll keep him hidden until they're sure he can't cause trouble. The realization hit Michael like a punch to the gut. Ethan wasn't just missing. He was being held somewhere, silenced but alive. And if Michael wanted to find him, he'd have to tread carefully. One wrong move, and Ethan could end up paying the ultimate price. As days turned into weeks, Michael's determination only grew stronger. He began visiting places Ethan used to frequent, the park where he played soccer, the diner where he grabbed coffee, the library where he studied late into the night. Each location stirred memories, reminders of the son he loved so deeply. But they also offered opportunities to ask questions, to seek out anyone who might remember seeing Ethan in those final days. One afternoon, while walking through the park, Michael noticed a familiar face sitting on a bench. It was Mrs. Patel, an elderly woman who had lived down the street from them years ago. She had always been kind to Ethan, often baking cookies for him and chatting about school or sports. Her eyes lit up when she saw Michael approaching. "Mr. Harper," she exclaimed, patting the space beside her. "It's been so long. How are you holding up?" Michael smiled sadly, taking a seat. "I'm doing okay, Mrs. Patel. Just trying to make sense of things." She nodded knowingly. Ethan was such a bright boy, so full of life. It breaks my heart to think of what happened to him. "Well," Michael said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "that's what I'm trying to figure out. Do you remember anything unusual about Ethan before the accident? Anything that stood out?" Mrs. Patel frowned, thinking hard. After a moment, she snapped her fingers. "Yes. Now that you mention it, I did see him talking to a strange man one evening. Tall fellow, dressed in a suit. Looked very official. They were standing near the parking lot, deep in conversation. Ethan seemed uneasy. A chill ran down Michael's spine. Do you remember anything else? What the man looked like, maybe? She shook her head apologetically. Sorry, dear. It was dark, and I was just passing by. But I do remember thinking it was odd. Ethan usually avoided strangers. Michael thanked her and left the park, his mind racing. A tall man in a suit? Could it have been someone working for Kane? Or perhaps someone else entirely? Whoever it was, they had played a role in Ethan's disappearance, and Michael intended to find out who they were. With each new clue, Michael felt himself getting closer to the truth. The web of lies surrounding Ethan's fate was vast and tangled, but Michael refused to give up. Somewhere out there, his son was waiting, and no matter what it took, Michael would bring him home. Michael's investigation had taken him further than he ever imagined, unraveling layers of secrets and exposing the dark underbelly of a world he barely understood. But now, as he stood outside a dingy apartment building on the outskirts of the city, his resolve was stronger than ever. This address, a tip Claire Bennett had managed to dig up through her network of informants, was supposedly tied to Ethan. It wasn't much, but it was the closest lead Michael had found yet. The building looked like it had seen better days. Cracked windows, peeling paint, and a flickering neon sign above the entrance that read vacancy in broken letters gave the place an air of neglect. Michael hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, steeling himself for whatever awaited him. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke, and the floor creaked with every step he took. There was no one at the front desk, so Michael headed straight for the staircase, climbing to the third floor where the unit number matched, the one Claire had given him. When he reached the door marked 3B, Michael knocked firmly, his heart pounding in anticipation. After a few seconds, the door opened just a crack, revealing the wary face of a young woman. Her eyes darted between Michael and the hallway behind him, clearly suspicious of his presence. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously, her voice tight. "My name is Michael Harper," he replied, keeping his tone calm and steady. "I'm looking for my son, Ethan. I think you might know something about him." The woman stiffened visibly, her grip tightening on the edge of the door. For a moment, she said nothing, as if weighing whether to let him in or slam the door shut. Finally, she sighed and opened it wider, gesturing for him to come inside. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, with mismatched furniture and stacks of papers scattered across the coffee table. The woman gestured for Michael to sit, then perched herself on the edge of a worn armchair across from him. "I don't know how much I can tell you," she began, her voice low and hesitant, "but yes, I knew Ethan. He stayed here for a while until things got too dangerous." "Too dangerous?" Michael repeated, leaning forward slightly. "What do you mean?" The woman glanced toward the window, as if checking for prying eyes, then turned back to Michael. Ethan wasn't just some kid who got mixed up in gambling debts. He stumbled onto something bigger, something involving Victor Kane and his crew. They use people like pawns, Mr. Harper. Once you're in, there's no easy way out. Michael felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "So what happened to him? Where is he now?" She hesitated again, clearly torn between loyalty and fear. "They moved him. After something went wrong. Ethan saw something he wasn't supposed to see, and instead of getting rid of him, they decided to hide him. Keep him quiet." "Where did they take him?" Michael pressed, his voice rising despite his best efforts to stay composed. "I don't know exactly," the woman admitted, shaking her head. "But I've heard rumors. Some say he's being kept in a remote cabin somewhere outside the city. Others claim he's living under a new identity far away from here. Either way, he's alive but not free." Michael's mind raced. Alive. Those two words echoed in his head, igniting a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. But the reality of the situation quickly sobered him. If Ethan was being held against his will, or worse, forced to live in hiding, it meant bringing him home wouldn't be easy. Whoever was keeping him would stop at nothing to keep their secret safe. Over the next several days, Michael worked tirelessly with Claire to track down any mention of remote cabins or properties linked to Kane's organization. They scoured land registries, cross-referenced property records, and even reached out to anonymous sources willing to share information for a price. Each lead seemed promising at first, but fizzled out upon closer inspection. Frustration mounted, but Michael refused to give up. Then late one night, Claire called with news that made Michael's blood run cold. She had uncovered a connection between Kane and a man named Victor Greaves, an enforcer known for his brutal tactics and unyielding loyalty to those who paid him. According to Claire's source, Greaves had been spotted near a secluded area, north of the city, driving vehicles registered to fake identities. Even more alarming, surveillance footage showed Greaves meeting briefly with someone matching Ethan's description. "This could be it," Claire said over the phone, her voice tinged with both excitement and caution. "If Greaves is involved, we need to tread carefully. Men like him don't play games." Michael agreed, though his determination only grew stronger. He couldn't risk charging in blindly, not when Ethan's life was on the line. Instead, he devised a plan to confront Greaves directly, hoping to extract information without escalating the situation. The following evening, Michael drove to the address Claire had provided, a dimly lit bar tucked away in an industrial part of town. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the hum of conversation. Michael scanned the room, spotting Greaves almost immediately. The man was tall and muscular, with sharp features and a permanent scowl etched onto his face. He sat alone at a corner table, nursing a drink and glancing occasionally at his phone. Taking a deep breath, Michael approached the table. Greaves looked up, his expression unreadable. "You must be Victor Greaves," Michael said, pulling out a chair without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Greaves raised an eyebrow, setting his glass down slowly. "Do I know you?" "No," Michael replied evenly. "But you know my son, Ethan Harper." At the mention of Ethan's name, Greaves's demeanor shifted ever so slightly. His jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed. "Harper? Yeah, I've heard the name. What about him?" "He's missing," Michael said bluntly, "and I have reason to believe you know where he is." Greaves chuckled darkly, leaning back in his chair. "You're barking up the wrong tree, old man. I don't deal with lost causes." "Don't play dumb with me," Michael snapped, his patience wearing thin. "Ethan didn't die in that car accident 5 years ago. Someone staged his death, and now he's either in hiding or being held captive. You work for Kane, which means you're involved. Tell me where he is, or so help me." Greaves cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Or what? You'll go running. To the cops, trust me, they won't touch this, and neither should you." For a moment, Michael considered backing down. Greaves wasn't bluffing. Men like him operated above the law, protected by power and fear. But then he thought of Ethan, all the birthdays, holidays, and milestones they'd missed together. All the unanswered questions, the sleepless nights spent wondering if his son was still alive. Michael couldn't walk away. Not now. "I'm not leaving until I get answers," Michael said firmly, his voice unwavering. "If you're smart, you'll tell me what I want to know." Greaves studied him for a long moment, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. "All right, listen closely, because I'm only going to say this once. Your boy's alive. But he made a choice to disappear. We gave him that option, and he took it. Now he's living somewhere safe, far away from here. Coming after him won't change anything. In fact, it might make things worse." Michael's chest tightened. "Safe? You call hiding him from his own family safe?" "It's safer than the alternative," Greaves shot back. "Out there, he has a chance. Here, he's a liability. And if you push too hard, you'll put him right back in the line of fire." The weight of Greaves' words hit Michael like a ton of bricks. On one hand, knowing Ethan was alive brought immense relief. On the other, the idea of leaving him hidden, unreachable, felt unbearable. Yet Greaves was right about one thing. Pushing too hard could endanger Ethan further. Michael needed a different approach, one that prioritized his son's safety above all else. As he left the bar, Michael's mind churned with possibilities. He couldn't abandon Ethan, but he also couldn't rush into a confrontation without a solid plan. Whatever happened next, he vowed to protect his son, even if it meant walking away temporarily. Because for the first time in 5 years, Michael had real hope, and that hope gave him the strength to keep fighting. The drive back home from the bar was a blur for Michael. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts, each one pulling him in a different direction. Greaves' words echoed in his head. "Your boy's alive." But he made a choice. A choice to disappear. Was it true? Had Ethan willingly chosen to vanish, knowing that staying hidden was the only way to survive? Or had he been coerced into it, forced to abandon his old life under threat of harm? Michael gripped the steering wheel tightly as anger and frustration bubbled inside him. He hated feeling powerless, but he also knew that acting recklessly could cost Ethan everything. For 5 years he'd mourned his son, believing him dead. Now, faced with the possibility that Ethan was alive but unreachable, Michael felt torn between relief and despair. The truth was finally within reach, but so were the consequences of uncovering it. The next morning, Michael met with Claire at her office, a small, cluttered space filled with stacks of papers, maps pinned to walls, and a whiteboard covered in scribbled notes. She greeted him with a cup of coffee and a concerned look. "You okay?" she asked, studying his face. "You seem conflicted." "I am," Michael admitted, sinking into the chair across from her desk. "Greaves claims Ethan is alive and hiding voluntarily, that they gave him a choice to stay safe or risk exposure. But I don't trust him. How can I be sure this isn't just another lie?" Claire nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible Greaves is telling part of the truth. If Ethan witnessed something dangerous, something tied to Kane's operation, they wouldn't want to kill him outright. Too risky. Keeping him hidden makes more sense." "But why not bring him home?" Michael demanded. "Why force him to live like a ghost?" "Because secrets are easier to keep when no one's looking for them," Claire replied, grimly. "If Ethan came back into the open, even to you, it would draw attention. Attention Kane doesn't want." Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. "So what do we do now? Just let him stay hidden forever?" "No," Claire said firmly. "But we need proof before we act. Proof that Ethan is alive and proof that he's being held against his will, if that's even the case. Otherwise, we're walking into a minefield blind." Together, they devised a plan. Using the leads Claire had gathered, they narrowed down potential locations where Ethan might be hiding. Remote cabins, abandoned properties, and isolated towns outside the city were all possibilities. They decided to focus on the cabin Greaves had hinted at, a secluded spot deep in the woods, accessible only by dirt roads. If Ethan was there, they needed to find him without alerting anyone who might be watching. 2 days later, armed with a map and a rented SUV, Michael set out for the remote area north of the city. The journey was long and grueling, taking him through winding mountain roads and dense forests. As he drove deeper into the wilderness, the landscape grew increasingly desolate. Cell service faded, leaving him completely cut off from the outside world. It was both terrifying and liberating, a reminder of how far he'd come to get answers. When he finally reached the coordinates Claire had provided, Michael parked the car a mile away from the cabin, deciding to approach on foot to avoid detection. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from rustling leaves and distant bird calls. Every step felt heavier than the last, anticipation building with each passing moment. As he neared the clearing where the cabin stood, Michael crouched behind a cluster of trees, peering cautiously through the foliage. The cabin was small and weathered, its wooden exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign that someone was inside. His heart pounded as he scanned the area for signs of movement. No vehicles were visible, but that didn't mean much. Whoever was guarding the place could have parked farther away. Taking a deep breath, Michael crept closer, staying low to avoid being seen. When he was within earshot of the cabin, he stopped, straining to listen. Faint voices drifted through the thin walls, though he couldn't make out the words. One voice sounded older, gruff, likely a guard. The other was softer, hesitant. Could it be Ethan? Unable to wait any longer, Michael called out softly, keeping his tone calm but firm. "Ethan, is that you?" The voices inside fell silent. A few tense seconds passed before the door creaked open, revealing a burly man with a scowl etched onto his face. He stepped onto the porch, scanning the tree line suspiciously. "Who's there?" the man barked, his hand resting on the holster, strapped to his hip. Michael froze, realizing he'd underestimated the situation. Confrontation wasn't an option. Not here, not now. Slowly, he backed away, melting into the shadows of the forest. Once he was certain the man hadn't spotted him, Michael retreated to the safety of his car. Back in the city, Michael pored over the details of his failed attempt, replaying every moment in his mind. He hadn't seen Ethan directly, but the soft voice he'd heard gave him hope. It had to be him. And if Ethan was truly being held in that cabin, Michael needed a smarter plan. One that involved more than just brute force. He reached out to Claire again, explaining what he'd discovered. Together, they brainstormed ways to infiltrate the cabin without raising suspicion. Claire suggested recruiting help, someone skilled enough to handle surveillance and extraction without drawing attention. Through her contacts, she arranged a meeting with a retired private investigator named Marcus Lane, a man known for his expertise in covert operations. Marcus listened intently as Michael recounted his story, his sharp eyes never leaving Michael's face. When Michael finished, Marcus leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "This isn't going to be easy," he said. "But it's doable. First, we gather intel. We need to know exactly who's guarding the cabin and their routines. Then, we strike when they least expect it." Over the next week, the trio worked tirelessly, gathering information and planning every detail of their mission. They mapped out escape routes, identified weak points in the cabin's defenses, and prepared contingency plans for anything that might go wrong. Michael knew the stakes were higher than ever. If they succeeded, he'd finally reunite with Ethan. If they failed, he didn't dare think about it. Finally, the day arrived. Under the cover of darkness, Michael, Claire, and Marcus made their way to the cabin, moving silently through the forest. Each step brought them closer to the truth, and closer to the danger lurking in the shadows. As they approached, Michael felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with fear. This was it, the moment he'd been working toward for 5 long years. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Marcus signaled for everyone to stop. He pulled out a pair of binoculars, scanning the area carefully. After a minute, he turned to Michael and nodded. "Looks clear, let's move." Heart pounding, Michael followed Marcus and Claire toward the cabin. With every step, he prayed they weren't too late, that Ethan was still alive and waiting for him on the other side of that door. Because after everything he'd endured, Michael refused to leave empty-handed. Not this time. The night was thick with tension as Michael, Claire, and Marcus crouched just beyond the tree line, their eyes fixed on the dimly lit cabin. The faint glow of a lantern inside cast eerie shadows on the walls, hinting at movement within. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig seemed deafening in the silence, heightening Michael's nerves. He clutched the flashlight tightly in one hand, his knuckles white from the effort to stay steady. This was it, the culmination of months of searching, questioning, and risking everything to uncover the truth about Ethan. Marcus signaled for them to move forward. They crept silently across the clearing, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. When they reached the side of the cabin, Marcus pressed his ear against the rough wooden wall, listening intently. After a few seconds, he turned to Michael and whispered, "2 people inside. One guard near the door, another deeper in the room. We need to act fast." Michael nodded, though his stomach churned with anxiety. What if Ethan wasn't here? What if this was all some elaborate trap set by Kane's men to lure him into danger? But there was no turning back now. For better or worse, he had to see this through. Following Marcus's lead, they split up. Claire stayed outside to keep watch while Marcus positioned himself near the front door, ready to neutralize the guard. Michael took a deep breath and stepped toward the rear of the cabin, where a small window offered a glimpse inside. Peering cautiously through the glass, he saw a figure sitting at a table, head bowed, hands clasped tightly together. Even in the dim light, Michael recognized that posture. Those shoulders slumped under the weight of years of hardship. It was Ethan. Tears welled up in Michael's eyes as relief and anger battled within him. His son was alive. Alive but trapped, forced to live like a prisoner in this God-forsaken place. Without hesitation, Michael tapped lightly on the window to get Ethan's attention. Startled, Ethan looked up, his face pale and drawn. For a moment, confusion clouded his features, then recognition dawned and his eyes widened in shock. "Dad?" Ethan mouthed silently, rising from his seat. Before Michael could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from inside the cabin. The guard stationed near the door was approaching, alerted by the noise. Marcus sprang into action, slipping inside and disarming the man with practiced precision. A muffled scuffle followed, ending with the guard unconscious on the floor. Seizing the opportunity, Michael pushed open the window and climbed inside, rushing to Ethan's side. Father and son stared at each other, disbelief etched on both their faces. 5 years of separation melted away in an instant as Michael pulled Ethan into a tight embrace. Neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. The flood of emotions said enough. But there was no time for reunions. Marcus ushered them toward the door, urging them to move quickly. "We're not out of the woods yet," he reminded them sharply. Outside, Claire kept a vigilant eye on the surrounding forest, her hand resting on the pepper spray tucked into her pocket. Together, the group hurried back to the SUV parked a mile away, moving swiftly but quietly to avoid detection. Once they were safely inside the vehicle and speeding down the dirt road, Michael finally allowed himself to speak. "Ethan, I thought you were dead. All these years I believed you were gone." Ethan shook his head, his voice trembling. "I wanted to tell you, Dad, but they wouldn't let me. They said it was the only way to keep us both safe." "Who are they?" Michael asked, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Kane? Greaves?" Ethan hesitated, glancing nervously at Claire and Marcus in the back seat. "It's complicated. After the accident, or what everyone thought was an accident, I ended up owing money to Kane's crew. When I couldn't pay, they gave me a choice: disappear or die. At first I thought it would only be temporary, but then things got worse. I stumbled onto something big, something they didn't want anyone to know about. That's when they decided I couldn't come back." "What did you see?" Michael pressed, his voice strained. Ethan swallowed hard. "I overheard Kane talking about bribing city officials, laundering money through fake businesses. There were names, dates, recordings, evidence that could bring him down. But if anyone found out, I knew they'd kill me. And you." Michael felt a surge of rage mixed with sorrow. His son had been living in fear, burdened by secrets too heavy for anyone to carry alone. Yet despite everything, Ethan had survived. And now, Michael vowed to protect him, not just from Kane, but from the past that had haunted them both. Back in the city, the group convened at Claire's office to plan their next move. Ethan agreed to provide detailed accounts of everything he'd witnessed during his time with Kane's organization. With Marcus's guidance, they compiled the information into a dossier, complete time-stamped records, and corroborating evidence. It was risky. Exposing Kane meant putting themselves directly in harm's way. But it was also the only way to ensure Ethan's freedom once and for all. Claire reached out to trusted contacts in law enforcement, ensuring the dossier landed in the hands of investigators who couldn't be bought off. Within days, the story broke publicly. News outlets reported on Kane's illegal activities, naming names and exposing corruption at the highest levels. Arrest warrants were issued, raids conducted, and key members of Kane's network brought to justice. For Michael and Ethan, the aftermath was bittersweet. While the threat of retaliation loomed large, they found solace in rebuilding their relationship. Years of separation had left scars, but they worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between them. Michael encouraged Ethan to seek counseling, helping him process the trauma of his ordeal. In turn, Ethan opened up about his struggles, allowing his father to understand the full extent of what he'd endured. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of Michael's home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan spoke softly. "I'm sorry, Dad, for leaving you behind, for making you think I was gone forever." Michael placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "You don't have to apologize, Ethan. None of this was your fault. What matters is that we're together now, and we'll face whatever comes next, together." As darkness fell, father and son remained seated side by side, finding peace in each other's presence. Their journey had been long and painful, filled with lies, betrayal, and heartache. But through it all, they had discovered something unshakable: the bond of family. No matter how far apart life tried to pull them, nothing could break the connection they shared. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of crickets and the distant glow of stars, Michael knew they would heal, together,